address is 1309, 11, 1313, 1315. Can you confirm those are the lots in question?
No.
Those are not the lots in question.
Oh, no, yes, those are, I think those are I can't see that map too well, but
There are these contiguous parcels, right?
yeah.
Yeah, the back row, Phyllis Ulrich is on the end, which is lot 1, and the Brules are looking at 2, 3, 4, and 5.
We don't have the lot numbers showing. Those are,
Just have the address. Okay.
yeah, but
Okay.
they're contiguous, 4 contiguous lots.
Yes.
Okay, so that, I'm sure Andrea indicated those, but the right lots. In addition to the pictures which show the vacant lots, we have a letter from the president of the Homeowners Association and comments. Janine Wagner, her correspondence to the Planning Commission, not in favor of the proposal, and hearing notice that went out to the residents. So the recommended action here for the Planning Commission is, in accordance with the Land Development Code, the Planning Commission is holding this public hearing to review the proposed major amendment request to the PUD and the support information provided, and to make a recommendation to the City Commission regarding this proposed amendment. And we have a recommended form of a motion for the request. So this is a recommendation. The Planning Commission is, according to the procedures, the first reviewing body for a recommended change to a PUD that doesn't meet the administrative standards, and I didn't feel that this met the administrative standards for approval of an amendment to the PUD. So with that, Joy, you can go to the applicant, I guess.
Okay, great. Sean, do we have the applicant? Oh yeah, we do have the applicant. Do you guys, Adrian or Mr. and Ms. Brule, do you want to speak on behalf of this?
Yes, excuse me. I'd like to, I'm David Bruley, and this is my wife, Thu, to my right. Our intention is to purchase those 4 lots, which are immediately across the street from the large lot you see more on the lakeside of the development, the picture that I see up on the screen right now. That lot is owned by us, and we're constructing a home there currently. We have 2 children, and our intention is to purchase the 4 lots that are, in essence, immediately across the street from where we're building, divide those equally amongst the 2 children so they have an opportunity to build. The timing is based on the fact that the oldest is a little girl, she's 13, and the youngest is a little boy, is 10. So we are requesting the time frame in order to be able to purchase the lots now that they're available and contiguous, and then be able to divide them later on and provide those to our 2 children.
So, and Joy and commission members, this is Adrienne Wolf. I just want to point out, so it's obviously it's a PUD because it's a condo development, but it is a site condo that was then approved in 2009. So it's already been 11 years since the PUD was approved. The time period right now, of course, begins when the transfer from the developer occurs, which has not yet occurred. So we're simply asking, we tried to narrowly tailor this request for an amendment so that it only applied to Mr. and Mrs. Brule, and it did give them a definite timeline, so that we were deviating from the initial PUD agreement as as little as possible, frankly. And then I also just want to point out that the request is supported by all of the stakeholders. The association and the developer are also in favor of it. And then you received the 2 letters of support from individual owners within the development as well. So we appreciate your consideration.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, and I want to add, having looked at the one letter of dissent, that we certainly intend to take care of the property. It's not ever been our intention not to mow the grass or not to improve it in some fashion. We are, as I mentioned, currently building the home across the street, and it's going to take us into the fall to be able to even get that completed, and probably into the winter. But then our intention would be come next spring when we start, we're finishing off the landscape on our property, that we move over across the street and improve that as well.
Okay, do we have any questions for our applicants from our commissioners? I just had one question, which is, are you planning on leaving the lots open, or you're not? Are you gonna? Is there any intention to like fence them off and keep them, or will the public be able to basically like pass through them?
It's our intention to keep them open.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Coase?
Would we need to have anything written, for example, just to say that, you know, it would be taken care of and there wouldn't be vehicles, just in that one concern of one of the community members? Is there something that needs to be done in that regard?
I think that's an interesting point, Commissioner Coase, and potentially, I don't know, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, it's something we could add if we chose to as a group, as a condition of approval.
As a recommendation.
Recommendation, right.
There's no driveways.
Yeah, and I could say that to that point, it's not meant to be a parking lot or turned into anything that would be objectionable to the neighbors. In fact, all of the neighbors that we've spoken with in the association are in favor of it. Some have obviously responded in writing, and others have responded to us. But it is our intention to improve the property, you know, because it's something that we look out at from our front door and our front windows. So we'd like it to be a nice addition to the little community. It's a great little neighborhood, and we intend to keep it that way. And I also want to add that we are on the committee, the homeowners association. We're active members of that. I am going to be the treasurer-elect here shortly. So, you know, our interest is we've invested a lot of money in the home across the street, and maybe some of you have even driven by there and seen it. We want to do whatever it takes to really make the area the neighborhood that it currently is, and continue to keep it that way, because that's quite frankly in our best interest.
Commissioner Larson?
If in the future your children decide not to build on that property, would you at that point in time exercise the right to build on that property in order to sell it? Or how would that work if, you know, one or both of your children decide not to pursue that property? Because we'd still be bound by, you know, the building of it at that new time frame.
Well, I'm not quite sure the angle of your question, but let me answer what I believe is what Thu and I would do. We're not landlords, so we're not in that business, and we don't want to be in that business. So if one of the children elected not to build next to mom, then I would imagine we would sell that, because it's not something that we would then keep with nothing on it. You know, at that point, it wouldn't make any sense. Thu is very close to the kids, and you know, they're a pretty tight-knit group, and I think the probability is high, but we can't be certain. But yes, if one of the children elected not to, then the lots would ultimately become for sale, because we wouldn't build anything and turn it into a rental or, that's not us.
Commissioner Middlefelt?
Yeah, I read all the documentation to support this, and I think it's to me it looks like a pretty clear-cut, easy decision. Seemed like you had the majority of support from the association, and it seems like a very reasonable request, a sweet request. I hope your children take you up on it. It's a beautiful area to live in. So unless people want more discussion, I'm happy to make a motion.
Well, let's just check if we have any public testimony before we get to that point.
Okay.
So are there any other questions from our commissioners for our applicants? Okay, so Sean, do we have any public testimony that wants to?
I don't know if there's anything written for Dave, but there's nobody on the line.
Okay. All right. I guess just one thing I want to point out is that we're just thinking about this in terms of planning. So go ahead, Commissioner
Right.
Middlefelt.
I don't say anything like there's no fundamental land use being proposed here. I mean, you know what I mean? I don't think there's a real planning issue. It's the same owner just trying to give themselves a bit more time, it seems to me. So, yeah.
I understand. I guess I just wanted to have a conversation about the one thing that stuck out to me was when I read the original PUD agreement, where they were very specific about the 6 years, and in fact sort of made it a little bit stricter because it was originally from the point of site plan approval and they switched it to the point of sale. So I guess I'm just curious as to what was the reasoning at that time that they, I think it was Bob Cambenzi was in the notes from that meeting. So I guess I'm just curious what their thought was at that time.
So-
I don't know, Dave, do you have any recollection of that meeting? It's from 2009.
I don't, but it's very typical, that kind of requirement. So, we have expectations for development with, a PUD is a very unique, each one is unique. It's the city makes an agreement with a developer to create special conditions for that development. And in return, the city expects development to occur within a certain time frame. And that's part of the reason there's a time limit put on the development. And as we just heard, 20 years is a very, very long time for being able to predict the future. And so it becomes almost impossible to predict what things may be for all of us in 20 years. So a 6-year time frame is much more realistic. And that's what our planning horizons for our master plan are all pretty much within. Our long range planning is over 5 years. 5 years and over is considered long range planning. Our recommendations for development, our master plan, for all of the recommendations in the master plan are based on 3 categories: near term, medium term, and long term. And so this is something that I think is relevant, and that's one of the reasons there isn't, that you don't see 20-year timeframes with development approval. And so this would set a precedent, and it's going to be up to the city commission to decide if they want to set a precedent like that.
Commissioner Dunn. So should we, I'm thinking maybe somebody should make a motion to suspend for discussion, just to
Do we need to
formalize?
close the public hearing first before that?
Yeah, so let's close the public hearing, and if somebody wants to make a motion, I think it would be worth our time to just have a little discussion about this before we go ahead.
Move to suspend the rules in order to have discussion.
Okay, Commissioner Dunn, thanks. Can we get a second?
Second.
Aaron Andrews.
Commissioner Andrus gives us a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, thanks. Commissioner Dunn, do you want to?
So I have two main concerns. And obviously I would very much like to figure out a way to make this work for the rules. And I truly appreciate everything that they're doing for the town and the Y and everything. It's huge. But I do have a couple of concerns, and one is just tax revenue, which I don't know if that's our purview or not. Obviously, the city commission will consider that. But the other is sort of, I want to say nepotism, even though it's not family. But for us to do a deed restriction that excludes specific people, and I understand the need for it being a specific exclusion, but to specifically exclude just the rules, as much as we might want to do that, I think it sets a very bad precedent for moving forward. And that is, you know, can we just do that and suspend the rules for people that are, you know, maybe some of our favorites and some folks that are really, you know, contributing to the town and contributing to our little community. As much as we might like to do that, I don't think that that's necessarily the right way to do things. So I would like to try and think out of the box and see if we can come up with a way to make this work, but without, you know, without specifically excluding them from the rules that were set up when this PUD was approved.
Commissioner Middlefelt?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, Commissioner Dunn, but I again, kind of going back to Dave's point about PUDs, and they're sort of their own entities. And I think there's a lot of flexibility, like they're designed to be flexible. And I mean, I know that it was contract, it did say 6 years, and that was clear. But I think that, you know, if they were planning to fundamentally change the use or like the intention of this area, of this land, I think, you know, I would have some problems with it. But to me, it seems like, I mean, when someone's part of an association, they don't totally give up, you know, all their rights and ideas about what to do with the land. And so, I mean, I get it legally, yes, there is a contract and it has to be 6 years, but I don't think, this doesn't seem like such a far off request. The association itself seems to support it. The one dissenting letter, they did mention that issue of property values. I think they were concerned that, you know, if it's not developed, they're not going to, I don't know, have comps or something. But just the way that area around there is going gangbusters, I don't see that as a huge issue. Maybe the city would have problems with lack, or maybe not as much tax revenue. That's for the city commission to decide, I guess. But I don't know. To me, this doesn't seem like it should be that controversial. I mean, rules or other families, I think it seems like a very reasonable request.
Commissioner Brooks? We still can't hear you. Okay.
He can dial into there's the phone number that he could dial into.
Eric, do you hear that? There's a phone number you can dial into. Do you want to try that? And we'll come back to you. There's a phone number you can dial into. Can you hear me?
Or a chat box.
Or you can do a chat box. Anyway, we're going to move on to Commissioner Andres, and we'll come back to you if you figure it out.
I have similar concerns as to Commissioner Dunn. I just think it's hard to plan 20 years out. And particularly our master plan only goes out at the most 5 years. So I'm just a little hesitant to agree to an exemption based off that permit.
Okay. Commissioner Larson, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. So I guess, I'm really, the part that hangs me up is the agreement initially that it was 6 years. And even though everybody's in support of it, I'm concerned about, there being, this setting a potential of a precedent saying of that we will agree to abide by the rules initially, only to come back and change them at a later time. And this, nothing to do with this site here, but looking if we agree to it now on this PUD, will similar issues, come up in the future in which, they say, yes, we agree, we think this part of town should be developed. We agreed to that 6-year time frame. But then, we kind of get forced into agreeing to a much longer term extension, down the line. So I think that's the concern that I have. Intentions here are great and wonderful, but it's really about, whether that we agree to abide by that 6 years. But after it gets approved, it starts being built, and then you come in and we say, let's not double it, let's not triple it. Let's go beyond that in setting up a new time frame. So that's where my concern lies.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Brooks, can we hear you now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Yay. I'd like to speak on this, that as a development standpoint, you're talking about 4 lots. Once these lots are developed, will substantially increase the tax value. And these developments are made and agreed upon by the city to be developed. And I have a hard time thinking of 4 separate lots that aren't built on and potential 20 years of lost revenue. And I agree with the other homeowner about comparables, because when you do these types of developments, you do want them developed because then it's going to increase the value of their home too. So I just have a hard time going against what the city initially agreed to. And really, quite frankly, 6 years is really a long time to have once the lot is purchased to actually develop. So I'm highly opposed to this.
Okay, that's interesting perspective.
Madam.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to sort of, this is not typically what we're kind of debating over. So I'm trying to kind of make sure I keep it in perspective as it relates to us, right? Because, there's aspects of this which, are really within our wheelhouse, and there's aspects of it which kind of maybe aren't. And I'm honestly kind of glad this is going to go to the city commission, because I do think this is a case where, we do know PUDs kind of are their own thing and they go by their own rules. So on the one hand, like, is it that big a deal to change the rules? And I guess that's the thing that I am curious about is, like, if we do this for them, do we have to do this for everybody else? Are we setting a precedent, or is this really just a one-off? So that's one thing I'm sort of trying to figure out in my head. And then, the other piece of it is, I'm trying to just think of it from a strictly planning perspective. So, like, what would be the detriments of we're basically tying these lots up for 20 years. So what is the impact of tying these 4 lots up for 20 years, sort of separate from everything else? So, I don't want to get too much into sort of tax revenue. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's going to really damage in the neighborhood. But on the other hand, if there is sort of an expectation of development for people who are buying within this area, is this a detriment to those homeowners because it's not going to get developed? I mean, in some cases, maybe people think it's a good thing because there'll be more open space. So it's really sort of a debatable question from that point of view. And then just procedurally speaking, you know, I'm just not really sure, are these the kinds of determination, you know, changes that we should be making procedurally from our end? I actually think it really makes a lot of sense that the city commission would be making this kind of a decision.
Madam
Joy?
Chair, may I respond?
Ms. Wolf?
Yes. I wanted to respond to some of the concerns that have been brought up. I guess I just want to be clear that as we sit here right now, because these units have not yet been transferred from the developer, no timeline has been begun. So in perpetuity, the developer can keep these lots for sale. And it is only upon the sale of these lots that the 6 years begin. So if you want to look at one of the positives of this particular request, it is that you are then given you begin the time clock. I understand it is a longer time clock than is typically given, but you at least begin that time clock because these units already have sat longer than what we're hearing is the long-term plan, the 5-year plan. They've already sat for 11 years without being sold to a third party.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I just want to be clear that it was never our intention to exclude others or somehow provide the Brules special treatment when we drafted this particular request. This was done in an effort to make it as narrow as possible because we know that the Brules are in a unique situation and we recognize that initial contract. We were honoring that initial PUD contract. So by naming the Brules specifically, it was so that if they are no longer the owners, that 20-year time period does not apply. Now, that being said, the Planning Commission can always attach conditions to its approval or, the recommendation or non-recommendation of this particular item. So if the Planning Commission was more comfortable removing names from the amendment and simply naming the units, again, you have a definite time period then that begins upon that sale. That is not something my clients or I would oppose. We added their names, and frankly, it makes it less saleable in the end. We added their names as a way to keep the amendment as narrow as possible. And then lastly, I just want to be clear that there is, again, no intention to change the rules after the contract has already been entered. The rules are here proactively. They have not yet purchased these 4 units. This was done in an effort to see if they could get this particular arrangement in place before they bought the units so that they were never in breach or even threatening a breach of the agreement with the city. So we're being proactive about this particular request.
Thank you. I get all of that. And that was my interpretation. I'll be honest. I didn't think that it was, you know, sort of a favoritism or anything. I saw it as a narrowing of the scope as well. So yeah, I appreciate that clarification. What was the other thought I had? I've forgotten it. Oh, that was what I wanted to ask. Dave, do we know, and this isn't a direct parallel, but I know there have been other times where we have had PUDs that have requested extensions because they did not get there. And I know it was it was like more of a site plan approval, I think. But would it be possible for the Brules to request an extension in lieu of requesting this 20-year timeline?
No, I don't think there have been similar requests. There have been extensions to begin the development. And that's the only thing I'm aware of. I mean, this PUD is 11 years old since it was begun. So it's, it's not similar really in my mind.
So that's not an option to sort of just have them come for a request every 6
weeks. One thing I'm sure the city commission will consider with this is in the city of Marquette, the taxation on lots that are undeveloped is vacant. They're considered vacant lots. So that is going to be a concern for the city commission. There isn't I'm not sure what they call it, a more proactive kind of taxation once a lot is owned in a PUD or another lot where there's a development expectation, but in the city of Marquette, any lot that's undeveloped is taxed as a vacant lot. So it's a very low tax rate.
Commissioner.
Yeah, just a question for Dave about this issue that's come up a couple times of precedent. With PUDs, my understanding is that because there's so much variation between different projects, that the issue of precedent really wouldn't apply for this extension of time, because it would depend on, say, a future PUD applicant came and wanted to change it, but they were gonna, do something, I don't know, if it was in a mixed use area, they were gonna do more commercial, or they were gonna have some kind of like, their plans were not sort of consistent with what the original PUD agreement is. Like, I guess my question is about precedent. Like, how much would a decision here set precedent for future PUDs, or is the devil really in the details with these, which is kind of my understanding of why people go with the PUD, and that precedent isn't as big of a concern. Can you speak to that, Dave?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. That's really a policymaker's, question, but as an administrator, we're kind of tightly wound on stuff, because once you let the cat out of the bag like that, or, you change the rules one time and people know about it, it's kind of hard to defend a rule that you have. So it's really up to the policymakers to decide on this one, what it means to change this rule.
Commissioner Andres?
I just want to reiterate that this isn't really our decision, and we make a recommendation. And the city commission does their thing, so why don't we just make a recommendation and let the city commission do what it will?
Well, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, that's the thing. We really need to think about this in terms of planning only. So it's not a tax revenue thing. I don't know so much about tax revenue, but it is a question of, tying up lots that would be residential development. So it is sort of taking out of commission, it is our concern to sort of promote residential development so that we have, housing stock. So there are parts of it that, again, are within our purview, and there are parts that aren't.
And that's where it is a planning question, I think, Ms. Chair, that, it is that question of the availability of housing on those lots is a goal for the city. And so how does a decision like this comport with that goal?
Right. So there's two issues. There's the housing issue, and then I think the procedural issue is within our purview, because procedurally, when we talk about this planning issue of planning ahead for 10, 15, 20 years, that is something that is within our wheelhouse. I mean, is there any sort of compromise to be made with like maybe a 10-year extension? Is that something that would be worth considering? I mean, I appreciate, where the applicant is coming from, and the spirit of it, but, I do have, it is a bit troubling, some of these other components. So I don't know if the 20 years is really, a hard number.
Well, if you don't mind me responding, it's based on the ages of the children. So in that span of time, as I said, our daughter is 13, so she would be 33. So we expect that in that time frame, she wants to be a veterinarian. So, but in that time frame, she would complete her school, and then I would assume, based on the bonds of the family here, that she would want to relocate to Marquette. And the little boy is only 10, so that makes him 30. And so our expectation is that sometime before that period of time, they would have made their decision. They'd be out of college and they'd have some established career or about to. So that's why we picked the 20 years. And, if it can't be long enough to accommodate them in their current ages, then it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because our purpose isn't to keep the lots off the market and not allow the city to have development. But I do want to point out that the home we're building, and please don't take this the wrong way, but we are talking about taxes, and it's been brought up, is rather substantial, the one across the street that we're building. And my guess is that whatever would be built on the 4 lots probably wouldn't equal what we've built in just one. And I think that what happens in the development in the future for the children, if in fact they choose that it would likewise, they would both be rather substantial homes. Again, I don't want anybody to take that the wrong way, but if we're talking about tax revenue, it's lost for a period of time, but like the home we've built, I think the substantialness of that home and the tax revenue that's brought into the city is going to more than make up for what the city may have lost in those 6 years or those extra years. In addition, as Adrian pointed out, the developer has taken those lots off the market. And not because of us, but that's what the developer has done. So I don't know what their intentions are, but we made this deal prior to their decision to take the lots off the market, or right about the time they were doing it. We were kind of one hand didn't know what the other was doing. So I can't speak for the developer. So whether you end up extending it just because of the contractual nature of the PUD and the developer sits on it for another 4 or 5 years, I can't speak to them. But at the moment, we know they're not for sale.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have any other thoughts anybody wants to share on this? All right, do we have somebody that wants to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. After conducting a public hearing and review of the PUD application with support information and staff memo attachments for 01-PUD-05-09-A7, the Planning Commission recommends that the PUD amendment request be approved by the Marquette City Commission with the following conditions: that until the lots are developed, they will be maintained in a neighborly fashion, no vehicles, mowed, etc.
Do we have a second? Does not seem like we have a second. Okay, well, we can't move forward with that motion since it doesn't seem like we have a second. All right, does somebody else want to make a motion? Or is there further discussion people want to have? I mean, yeah, the struggle with this is I feel like this is a decision that really the city commission kind of needs to use their discretion on. And so we should really be sticking to the sort of planning aspect of this. I mean, I guess I'm struggling with the fact that I don't really think not having the properties developed is going to be hurting anybody, but it does sort of go against the spirit of these PUD systems that we've set up. So So I'm finding it hard to kind of find a reason why we should approve it. But we do need somebody to make a motion. Is there additional arguments?
So I think
Larson?
so I think one of the things the reasoning. So if we are going to suggest, at least lay out why we think if it should be denied, for the following reasons. So I think that's where, I think we need to have, just that, one or two points there,
Right.
to
Good
kind
point.
of to lay out. And so I think we can use for, this just a little bit more discussion in that. And, I think essentially I'm hung up on this for those same reasons. Just in that extension is a very long time. And so for the following reasons, that it does not, and one of them should be somewhere along those lines of like it extends it, it more than triples the time frame for it.
It extends beyond the master plan.
So I think, so that, yeah, it seems to me like
Extends
there's
beyond the original intentions.
two components. One would be, finding that, our master plan, or finding that our master plan, puts a great emphasis on developing residential properties. We find that having these properties not be developed for 20 years is too long of a time for us to be comfortable with. Would be something along the lines of one.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, I mean, it looks like, I think Commissioner Larson was trying to put together some findings.
Eric, if you can, Commissioner Brooks, if you're able to kind of put that, include, that, those findings. So, I mean, I think so right now, we just want to make sure that we have findings associated with it in order to provide a little bit of context to the city commission, for our reasoning. And I think Commissioner or Chair Cardillo there, kind of what she was stating beyond, master planning, residential, emphasis on residential development, 20 years is kind of beyond kind of some of the scope of the original intention of the PUD. I think that's the most important one for me within this scenario. If you have another finding that you'd like to include, I would welcome that as well.
Well, I was just gonna read it off and, amend the request to be denied. I think if they came forth with maybe a 10-year plan rather than a 20, maybe it'd be a little more reasonable. But 20 years, there's just too many unknowns. And to think of these 4 lots and the amount of tax revenue that will be lost by the city of Marquette and by potential comps for the people in the neighborhood who bought these with the intention of this neighborhood being developed. And it's already been 11 years and it's still not fully developed. So I really have a hard time. I mean, if they came forth with maybe saying instead of the 6 years, make it 10 years, I think that'd be a little more, easier to chew, but not 20 years. There's too many unknowns.
Well, so Commissioner Brooks, the only thing, so what we'd like to do, if you're going to make a motion to deny it, we'd like to have findings included in the motion, is what Commissioner Larson's saying. So we just would encourage you to add findings.
The finding is going by the original development. I don't know. I won't make a motion then because I would just. My findings are that there's a reason that this PUD was put into place with 6 years. I mean, and that's still a long time. from when someone purchases that, the amount of time that they have to develop it. So I just have, yeah. I'll just back off and
Okay,
I said
I hear what you're saying. We're trying to craft these motions in a way
right.
that are clear
Right.
to the city commission if they're not sitting here listening to this conversation.
Right. No, I agree. Go ahead, Michael.
All right, well, I would, so even if it's just that one initial finding or that one additional reasoning, I just think it's important to have at least, one reasoning in here when we push to the planning commission or the city commission, so that they understand that and aren't necessarily reading back through the entire transcript to get the gist of it.
Right.
So I if you think that's all right, Chair, I will make a motion using at least just that one of the reasonings there.
Sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think just basically stating it's a longer term than we feel comfortable with.
Yep.
And, I'll just put it out, like, in this particular case, like, I think it's the responsible decision for us to make as a planning commission. I think if the city commission has other things that they want to bring to the table in their decision that, supersede this, in this particular case, I think, it's not something that would break my heart, but I just feel like from my perspective, as far as the range and perspective that we offer as a planning commission, this just doesn't fit really with what we should be doing.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question?
Yes.
So I want to understand, obviously for future presentation, if nothing else, the concept of 10 versus 20. I understand that 10 is less than 20, so I get that part. But the idea that the planning period is too long, that I'm falling a little short on in terms of understanding why if the planning, we know what the planning is. In our case, we're either going to build 2 houses, one for each child, or we're going to sell them. So I'm failing to understand the logic on the planning horizon being too long. I guess my question is, we've laid out the plan as to what we expect to do. And if we don't build, the children don't want to live there, then we sell it. So that part I understand, or that part I'm a little concerned about, grasping it entirely. And I'm struggling with the idea that the property tax values go down. Our neighbors that have all built in that area that is in the part of the PUD, the person that commented does not live in the PUD. She lives in the other development in the condominium building that's adjacent to the property. So in terms of the neighborhood and their view of leaving the lots vacant and well cared for, in our case, we were looking at turning it into a little, what I would guess call a pocket park on our expense and maintained by us. That I think that according to our neighbors, it enhances the value of the neighborhood. They all liked it. So, I want to get some clarification from you folks as to the planning horizon and why that's relevant to this. And then obviously you're not a tax authority and I understand that, but I think the argument can go either way on that. And I think that ultimately the city benefits. So, but could somebody just enlighten me on the
I can give you my perspective on it. I think, this project was developed some years ago with a PUD is always done with a very specific intention. And in this case, it was done as a residential development with a certain number of units. And so what you're asking us to do here is essentially from our perspective on a planning level is to really change that, because we're saying that, we're delaying this for 20 years, which is basically too far out. What I think we're trying to say is it's too far out of our range to really sort of say that it's happening. It's very far into the future. And so, you know, it's a significant change to the agreement that was made with the city. So it's certainly not a minor change. And this was made with the city with the intention of sort of fulfilling certain desires in the community for, you know, developing residential housing. So I think that's the perspective where we're coming from, is that this is a significant change to the agreement that was made for the development of this property. And again, I go back to, if the city wants to sort of reevaluate that at the city commission level, I think that's one thing. But I think within the terms of the agreement that were made, this is just a big change that that is not fulfilling a certain desire that was the intention of this PUD. Commissioner Dunn, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just that I think additionally, one of our tasks as a planning commission is to try and address the needs of the whole community as much as we can throughout the planning process. And where I'm having difficulty with this, and I guess it's a point that I didn't bring up earlier, but you know, we don't know what will happen. And I understand Mr. Brule's point that this would at least be sort of a definitive 20 years. But at the same time, we sort of have an obligation to provide as much housing as we can, being that we have a housing shortage in the downtown area right now. We have an obligation to get as much density and as many housing units available as we can, as soon as we can. And so, you know, to plan something out 20 years is not really fulfilling our obligations, because our needs might be totally different 20 years from now.
Commissioner Middlefeld?
I think I'm happy to be the dissenting voice in this, but just to kind of echo, I think what Mr. Brule was pointing out is, I think as a planning commission, I think some of the challenges we find ourselves is because we do think on too short of time scales. And yes, we have a contract here that was 6 years, but I think I've been trying to push for, like, let's think longer term. And so I think 20 years, if it's going to have an intact neighborhood feel, you know, I think given the fact that these people live there, they're going to be invested in making, you know, nice housing for family, for the neighborhood. But then the other thing, if I recall, one of the main things in our in our community master plan really emphasizes the need for affordable housing. And frankly, this neighborhood is probably not going to be addressing that need at all, period. So that, I mean, yes, we need housing, but this isn't the 1950s post-war boom where we have to be going and building like you know, efficient houses everywhere. We're not going to be able to house and feed our population. You know, I think it's, we have an opportunity to develop certain areas in a manner that is consistent with the broader goals of the master plan and a good sense of community. And I think the intention there of what they're trying to do fits some of those other aspects of the community master plan. It's just a longer time scale, which I have no problems thinking on longer time scales, because I think some of our big problems come up from just thinking about the next, you know, fiscal year kind of thing. So again, I'm maybe in the minority on this, but I see this as a thoughtful, intentional attempt to build a sense of community and family. And I don't see our job. I mean, I know they have the contract, so we can, as if the majority of the planning commission goes back to that, yes, I think we're legally within our rights to say that, you know, there was a contract 6 years, but I think on a bigger kind of conceptual level, this to me doesn't violate some of the bigger goals of our community master plan. And the fact they're going to put a pocket park actually, I think makes me even more supportive of the idea of like adding that sense of neighborhood, sense of community there until it does become developed. So, but again, I'll stop because I think I'm in the minority on this, but I think Mr. Bolt raised some good points.
Commissioner Brooks? Oh, we lost your audio, Eric.
Are you there?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is a planned unit development, stressing the word development. Waylaying this 20 years is, you know, you're talking about tax revenue here. You're talking about assessed value. When you have vacant lot, the actual assessed value is substantially less than something that's developed there. So when you're talking about a shortage right now of housing in the city of Marquette, and there is a lot of people that are looking for lots these days, I hate to just see them kind of held hostage as an assessed, a tax assessment, because once they are developed, they're going to be worth substantially more to the city. And you're talking upwards of $100,000 potential loss to the city if these are held up for 20 years as vacant lots. So that's where I have an issue with it, because these developments are made to be for the city, to create housing, to create tax base so that we can continue to run our city. So that's where I have an issue with it. Yeah, I just can't see them being, and and then saying that it's a pocket park. I don't think the planned unit development would probably, or a lot of the neighbors would be cool with also creating a pocket park there that's open to the public. So I don't see that as an argument at all. And quite frankly, if they own these lots, the city will have to maintain it just because of rules and regulations. You can't just turn it into a hayfield. But anyways, I really do agree that, this is not, if they came in with a 10-year plan and, holding out for 10 years maybe, but 20 years is just too many unknowns and too much lost revenue for the city. I'm done.
Okay. Commissioner Larson, did you have a?
Nope.
No. Okay. Well, we still need somebody to make a motion.
I'll make a motion. I don't have any further comments. And I'll make a motion. I'm going to include my one reason that is associated with it. Essentially comes down to that timeline and that horizon. Again, this is only a recommendation. This is only a recommendation kind of from this point of view. And it'll go to the city commission, and the city commission can certainly take other factors into consideration. But I'm of the mind that with the plan unit development entering into that contract, at that particular time was entered into it for a particular reason, and it does seem a little bit unfair to change it or to make exceptions, this far into it. So I think that's where I'm coming at it from, is that we have that 6-year time frame. Moving it to 20 is a little bit beyond what I think should be. If it was a request to extend it by 4 years or 5 years, maybe that becomes more reasonable. And maybe that becomes more reasonable, during, after it's purchased. I do appreciate that that they've come forth to us prior to this and trying to get their heads around, what might happen with this if it were purchased. So being proactive, I certainly applaud that, and I think that's a reasonable way to do it. But I'm going to make a motion. I'll make a motion that says, after conducting a public hearing and review of the PUD application with support information and staff memo attachments for 01 PUD 0509A7, the Planning Commission recommends that the PUD amendment request be denied by the Marquette City Commission for the following reasons: that the city of Marquette granted a PUD with the intentions of being developed within a 6-year time period from purchase of the lot, and the request to extend 20 years is too far out of step with the original PUD contract.
Aaron Andrews, I would support.
Okay, I'm going to do a roll call vote. Commissioner Andres?
No.
Yes to this motion.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes to this motion.
Commissioner Larson?
Yes.
Commissioner Middlefelt? Commissioner Dunn?
Yes.
Commissioner Coase?
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No.
No. And I vote yes. So the motion carries. Okay, thank you for your time. And again, you can see how the city commission falls on this. They might have a different set of factors that they weigh into their decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will be in touch with Counselor Wolf about the timeline for the city commission meeting, but I expect that will be in October because of just to clean that, I'm not exactly sure the motion read for the following reasons that the city granted a PUD with an expectation or a requirement that Michael, do you have the exact language?
Yeah.
Repeat that back to me.
Yeah, I said it granted a PUD with the intentions of being developed within 6 years.
Intentions of being developed within 6 years. Okay.
From, I think I said from point of purchase or point of sale.
Okay. I will go, we have this, of course, being recorded, so that's not an issue. I just wanted to make sure I was getting it correctly. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. We have citizens wishing to address the commission on agenda items. Do we have any, Sean?
Nope.
Okay, we have no old business or new business, and I'm assuming we don't have any citizens wishing to address the commission on non-agenda items.
Correct.
And we have our bi-weekly report.
I don't have anything to add on the report.
Okay, I read through that. It looked fine. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I guess I would let everybody know our department is now down by one staff member. Our planning zoning tech accepted another job in the finance department, which is not unexpected. People in that position tend to get burned out in 2 or 3 years, and it's really hard to keep people in that job. I don't think we've had anybody in that job, even though the pay is pretty good for somebody for this area and for good pay and benefits, but it's a thankless job.
Which position, Dave?
Huh?
What position was it that you lost?
The planning zoning tech, which is the person who does our code enforcement
Okay,
and has to deal with a lot of angry people.
got it. Well, are you gonna find somebody to?
I'm not sure what the plan is right now. There's been a freeze on hiring new positions for some time now, for several months. So it may be that we're going to ride out the winter and see how things go. I'm not sure. It's above my pay grade, and I just hope we'll be able to refill the position before next summer, get somebody trained. Certainly, we've been kind of, in a way, we've not been, proactively enforcing the code. Some things were returned to normal, but, I think there is kind of across the board sort of an intention to make life easier on people in a way, but there, things, some things definitely need to be, regularly patrolled, or they tend to get out of hand pretty quickly. So I mean, you can't, we have to have, if people want Marquette to look nice and feel nice, we have to have code enforcement, a proactive code enforcement program. So I don't know how long it goes without that position, but there are several departments. The Department of Public Works is down staff, and that's one of the reasons why our bike route system planning is getting to be 2 years behind schedule now, because they don't have the people to get the work done. They have more critical work for people. They're down staff. They can't rehire positions that they've lost, or people that retire.
Okay. All right, so I guess we can move on to land development code amendments. I'm just gonna grab this photo. I'll be right back.
Yeah, so being that really took a long time, that case, I don't want to repeat too much of what we talked about last week, but I would like to let everybody know that Joy and my department head and I had a sit-down meeting with the chief consultant for the Downtown Development Authority's new downtown plan, which is a strategic plan where they've hired people that are experts in town planning, in parking and traffic. And it's the same company, Nelson Nygaard from New York. They did a parking plan analysis and plan for the Downtown Development Authority about 5 years ago, which was part of what 3rd Street was reconfigured to some extent after their recommendations were adopted. And there were more parking spaces added on 3rd Street, even with the bike lanes that were added. But we did talk about a lot of different things, and they are going to present this to you at your next meeting. They're going to do a quick, probably less than an hour presentation on the downtown plan. And it's basically going to be an informational thing. They're not going to be looking for a lot of any detailed feedback from the Planning Commission. They want to basically let everybody know what is in the draft plan. Basically, they've been given, pretty much already been given approval for a lot of the concepts by the DD board, their board of directors, which includes our city manager. So I'm not saying that they're going to do a lot of the things that a lot of these things they're planning are very high level conceptual type of things. They're not detailed, real super detailed. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities over the years to change things. But a couple of the things I wanted to mention are the building heights. We did talk about that, building heights downtown. Just let you know that pretty much the DDA board and their consultants are in favor of increasing building heights to allow for 5 stories of modern development. So that would mean something along the lines of what we're suggested, 74 feet probably at a minimum. Because when you think about stories, 12 feet is typical now for a single story, but often a first story of a building is 16 to 18 feet. You have it, maybe you have an atrium or other features that open up the ground floor a little more than a typical upper floor. So I'll just mention that. And with 3rd Street, they definitely like the idea, I think, of having a 0-foot setback in the denser part of the corridor, which is something we talked about here in the T5 district, changing this front setback from 5 to 0 feet for those 2 denser ends of the corridor. We didn't really specifically talk about the rooftop patio thing, but that's as after our last meeting, we had some comments about some of these standards in here. So I've kind of come back to where this is matches what we had for the setback, front setback, so that these encroachments are more or less to the setback. If we want balconies to be all the way to the front setback, that's something you can talk about as well. But the rooftop patio thing, thought that it made sense to at least throw this out, that it could be to the property line as long as it's not over a public sidewalk.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Quick question about this rooftop patio. So to the property line, I know our intention is that that would be like on the street face, but would this also allow it to go to like the backyard property line? Or is that?
Well, the placement here, so there's all these little, this schematic is kind of funky, but you see that there are these little letters that tell you in the chart, I and the two I's. So the back lot of there is a rear setback of 3 feet in the denser part. And then when you get into the accessory buildings, you know, those outbuildings can only be in this section 7 here, 3 feet minimum to 40 feet maximum from the rear property line. So all those standards are in there. I'm not sure, but I think that's what you're asking about.
Well, I'm trying to understand.
In the side setbacks.
The rear, well, I'm just, because I mean, I'm totally for it going to the street. I just want to, you know, we have so many residential properties that butt up to the back sides of these properties. And do we want to allow rooftop patios to go up to the rear side? I mean,
To the rear. Well, good point. I guess it should be with this, you know, if we're concerned about that, it should be with the setback requirement. You know, you want the patio to extend over necessarily the rest of the building. If it's a 3-foot setback from the rear yard, you'd probably want to keep that, right?
yeah, but you could certainly cantilever a deck out 3 feet.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I just think leaving a little buffer so that.
Yeah. So should the language just say, you know, be matched up to the setback?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I think it's part of the building, so it would be. I mean, I don't think we really need to change anything. It's just in the front, sometimes you could have a property line that's actually over where the sidewalk was built. You know, it was, that's why I wanted to put that in there, but not over a sidewalk, because some buildings are actually over the property, you know, because it wasn't surveyed to whatever modern standards or whatever. You know, we see this with houses that are on 10 feet over on the neighbor's property line downtown. There's some crazy things like that. Some of these buildings might be slightly over the sidewalk, or some of these private properties might encroach into the sidewalk area. So
Could we get in trouble on the front setback for that same reason?
well, that's why it's said, but not over a public sidewalk with the patio thing here, because I wouldn't want anybody to get in trouble with that. But
no, but I'm talking about even on the building placement, not the roof, but up above where we're going from 5 feet to 0 feet or whatever.
Yeah, I really doubt it.
Okay.
You can't build on the public sidewalk, so that would be. No, my concern is more just like if you build the building to 3 feet, you could cantilever out your patio on the back.
Yeah.
And do we want to? I don't know. I would prefer to not allow that.
So as part of the building, it can't go past that 3-foot buffer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this doesn't supersede the building line.
Right.
Okay, I get it. Yep.
I'm going to skip over this if there's any questions. This was just, again, to try to correct the part of the code where we don't acknowledge that sometimes with like roads, you're not, it's an administrative approval of a site plan and not necessarily the planning commission every time that's approving a use that's subject to the riparian overlay standards. But this only said planning commission in here, which was an oversight that can't quite understand, but it was in there. And we just had one of those, a question about a potential development that would be approved administratively. Unless there's any questions, I'd like to skip ahead a little bit on some of this. The accessory dwelling unit thing is something, you know, I've asked our attorneys to suggest if they have a different idea on this language, and I haven't got a reply yet about the deed part of this that we talked about last week. If there's another option that would maybe be a little less cumbersome for everybody, but we'll see if they come back with something else. Dennis was a little concerned about the, I'm not sure I have the right. I just changed I know I changed this language to say not exceed 8 feet in the front yard or 16 feet in side or rear.
That was what we had discussed last time.
Yeah, so I know I changed it, so I'm not sure why it's not showing up here. But anyway, that was what I think you guys wanted, and I'll make sure it's in there when we review this again. Dennis did send out a lot of all of this to other departments to make sure, that we got comments from anybody that was concerned with any of this. This is something new that I'd like you guys to look at, and this is about fences. So we've had several people get variances or ask for variances. No one's ever been denied to my knowledge. And we have a woman in this Picnic Rocks PUD right now that built a fence that was 6 feet high without, they're not allowed to have a 6 on her lot's a through lot. So it basically has a front yard on either side. Both sides of her lot face a public street. So there's several of those lots in there that are like that. They're called through lots. And basically you are dealing with a front yard on either end of your lot. That's just the way it is. And so you can only have a 6-foot screening fence in a rear yard. And as maybe a solution to some of the issues, and almost invariably people are asking for a higher than 4-foot fence because they have a big dog. And they're worried about the big dog when the snow is 3 feet deep, easily jumping over the fence, which is a real possibility. So I was thinking that maybe we should just see how it would go to suggest allowing for a 5-foot fence in the front, in a front yard or any yard, a 5-foot fence that's 50% open. And of course, so one of the drawbacks of that, the immediate, kind of planning consideration you'd have is how does it affect community character? If you've already got a bunch of houses that have 4-foot yards and people start building 5-foot yards, it might look a little funky. Well, one thing you have to think about is that when people build fences, they're usually buying pre-made panels. Almost invariably, they're going and they're purchasing, or the contractor's purchasing pre-made panels. And so those panels are made to be 4 feet and 6 feet high. So if you want a 5-foot fence, you basically have to customize it. So that's, in my mind, going to ensure that people that elect to if we allowed it, people that elected to build a 5-foot fence really want it. They really want it, and they're going to pay the premium so that they can build that fence to 5 feet. I know 6 feet will never fly with city commission to allow 6-foot fences in a front yard, but I think 5 maybe. And another consideration might be that 5-foot fences only if the 2 or 3 feet, the upper 2 or 3 feet is completely open with only wire strands. It's a particular kind of fence. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but there's a couple that are going to the BZA with a request to build a 5-foot version of this fence where the bottom is relatively completely enclosed for the first 2 feet, and then the next 2 feet are completely open. You can buy those as 4-foot fence, but they want theirs to be 5 again because they're concerned about their dog being able to get over it.
Commissioner Dunn?
I appreciate kind of where you're going with it, Dave, but I totally disagree. I would be worried about 5-foot fences in the front yard just because if that's what everybody's doing, and I know it wouldn't be that way, but I've got to think that way, that if we make it allowable, then potentially that could happen where you've got several right next to each other that are building 5-foot fences. And now, I mean, that's the height of a lot of people are that height. And so you're totally boxing it in, and it's like, I don't know, it just totally ruins that neighborhood vibe. It's like, you know, you're walking by like a prison wall at that point.
Commissioner Larson?
Remind me, is chain link fences not allowed, or?
Chain link fences are allowed in most districts.
But folks can have their dogs in their backyard, you know, I mean, and if that's, you know, I know we've seen a lot of them, and I know they're always asking for more height, but I would still prefer to just deal with them as a variance, you know, so we can look at the specific situation and see if it's going to work.
I would say that I know certainly for those streets that have like those 3 through lots where you essentially have 2 front yards, it seems that it would be a fair compromise to allow you to have a taller fence in one of those yards.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I fall. My initial gut reaction is very similar to Commissioner Dunn's, especially being 5 feet tall myself. It's kind of my worst nightmare. But you know, I think I would rather, just let's identify these situations where it really is a case of, you know, somebody having a lot and just wanting to have a portion of their yard where they can call it a backyard. I would rather make sort of a special exception within the code for that than set a rule for 5-foot fences in front yards. I would be opposed to 5-foot fences in front yards. I think for character, I think if you're the neighbor of somebody who's got we have so many fence disputes already. I think, you know, just having that visual sight line, which 4 feet does achieve, is better. For the overall character, and I don't know, I guess I'm just not that sympathetic to the dog argument. I think if you have an area where you can put a dog, it doesn't have to be all of your yard.
I would be in support of 5-foot fences.
What?
I said I would be in support of 5-foot fences, not to discriminate against 5-foot people, but I don't think that it's you know, especially if it is of, you know, 50% open. If it continues to be 50% open, there is still some through site, you know, associated with it.
Again, I know this is taking it to the extreme, but just imagine what that would look like if there was all the houses on a particular block had 5-foot fences in their front yard, and you're walking down that sidewalk.
Well, certainly understand. I mean, there's, you know, some houses that have essentially a 8-foot wall of shrubs, you know, that, you know, are lining the sidewalk and spilling out over onto the sidewalk. You know, in our neighborhood, Joy, you've walked up
Yep,
our
right
street,
next to your house. Yeah.
you know, and it's, you know, it's an 8-foot, you know, line of shrubs that are there that are it's essentially creating a impenetrable wall into, you know,
And
seeing.
it has to width out into the sidewalk.
What was that?
It also cuts the sidewalk in half.
In some cases it does, and I mean in other neighborhoods, you know, you see that there's shrubbery or some sort of tree, you know, fence that's kind of there as well, and so which certainly doesn't have any through. And maybe it's nicer to look at trees than it is at a fence, but you know, I think it's an interesting experiment, you know, suggesting it be 5 but not 6, and making sure that's more custom of sorts, or they're cutting down 6-foot panels into, you know, 5-foot, you know, chunks.
What do you guys think of the idea? If they're 5, they could only be 5 if the upper 2 or 3 feet is composed of wire, like what, you know, horizontal wire strands, which is it is a common fence design, and they look nice. I mean, it's not like some kind of stockyard fence. I mean, it's
not the spiraled barbed wire on
the ones over off of Elder Drive are extremely nice. I mean, some of the nicest fence I've seen.
I can't picture it, but I mean, it seems like a reasonable compromise to me. But then again, I'm in favor of it. So
yeah. Well,
yeah, I'd feel better about that if it was somehow. I don't know if I'd say more than 50% opaque. Like, I mean, yeah, if it was cable wire or you know, like a cable, you know, like the cable railings and things like that, you know, then you don't feel as boxed in when you're walking next to it. You can still see over the top of it.
yeah, I'll come up with an example of something that might work for that and see how that discussion goes. If that's
I was
okay.
just gonna say, if you could come up with visuals so we could see
Yeah.
it, then maybe a better synopsis than going around and around.
Commissioner,
Okay.
Hall, did you have something to say? I didn't hear. You got cut off.
Me?
Oh, I thought you got cut off. I wasn't sure.
Oh, no, I was just saying like what Dave was talking about. I think I know what he's talking about, but it seems like it could go badly very quickly, like getting into this design of, you know, certain horizontal materials, you know, I don't know. I'm kind of with Commissioner Dunn on this one. I mean, I can see people not wanting their dogs getting out, but do we need more walls in our town? I don't know.
and the BZA did deny one fence permit while we were on while I was on the BZA, and that was for they put a 2 foot tall of a fence in the front yard.
Yeah, people, we've had a lot of people build fences in the front yard that exceed 4 feet without permits. So it's kind of not an unnatural inclination for people to think 5 feet is, or 6 feet is.
Since we're talking about fences, could I just bring up one more potential issue? And I think we talked about this really briefly, and maybe it's already in there, but it's for, I'm thinking about like the T4, T5 district areas where you have residential, you know, kind of abutting. Right now, I think it says that the business is allowed to potentially put up to an 8-foot fence, but, you know, are we able, could you have language in there saying that maybe it's the homeowner that wants to put up that sort of screening fence, you know, to that abuts to that business, you know, to help, you know, shield that, and maybe allow that to be a closed construction fence in that scenario if it's like backing up to a business, a parking lot, or something along those lines, along those areas.
The code for 3rd Street says private lot line fences, which are between the properties in the rear yard, shall be between 48 and 72 inches in height and may be of open or closed construction. And then a fence or wall in the side or rear yard of an approved commercial outdoor food and beverage service use or outdoor entertainment community events uses approved by special land use permits may be up to 8 feet in height of solid opaque construction for the purposes of visual and noise screening for particular use.
So that covers those homeowners that, you know, abut to those commercial properties. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by covers them, but
Oh, if they're a homeowner, that means that they are allowed to build a closed construction fence, you know, potentially up to 72 inches. So not quite the to the commercial level.
oh, that's only for the approved commercial use. So it's not for the resident. The resident can build up to a 6-foot fence
Of closed construction.
for closed construction.
Got it.
On the solar energy thing, you know, we're probably going to end up having to take a vote about the 2.5-foot side yard encroachment thing, it seems like. I haven't yet heard a clear consensus on that. Of solar system size for ground mounted units, I did find out the BLP's policy is that anything 20 kilowatts or above, they do not allow interconnection, but anything under 20 kilowatts is fine for they do want those people to, they do require, I think, an interconnection agreement. And so they are good with us. You know, it would be compliant with their policy. It would interface perfectly to have us say for these systems can be up to 20 kilowatts or of less than 20 kilowatts for doesn't, you know, we don't need to specify if it's business or commercial. They don't care. And I don't think we should. Just based on talking to Kevin Downs at the BLP, he's told me that he's seen several homeowners that have built systems that are slightly over 10K. They're not seeing anything on the 20K side, really, more 11 and 12, but he didn't have any reason really why they don't have any objection to up to 20K. So that's kind of a no-brainer. This requirement for removal of the system here, this is something Dennis and I talked about, and he wasn't really sure what this code has. The code language had a lot of real complicated language about having, if they, you know, the city could enter into an agreement with the property owner to allow for them to remove panels if they go dark or they're not being used for and then for a period of over a year. And, you know, to me, I don't think we need all that complex language in there. And then the period, 12 months seems like too short a time. If the home is just vacant for some time, that really is too short a period. And even if it needs to be fixed, if the homeowner intends to fix it, you know, winter can be 6 months, and that can really, for doing work on a roof, that really cuts into how much time you have to get things done. And so I was thinking at least 18 months. This probably should be an 18-month period if we're going to say that if your system isn't being used or if it's not functional anymore, that the city may issue a civil infraction. You know, you just go to the bottom of this statement is pretty much how we deal with almost everything where there's a non-compliance with code issue, and you seek removal of the system through a civil infraction without having all this agreement language in there. And I if anybody has thoughts on that, but that's kind of where I think us as administrators would like this to go.
It looks okay to me.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna have it, I think if you're gonna have something like this in there, giving the most amount of time possible makes sense. I mean, I think it's a hard enforcement case, given that, you know, there's no indication, there's not necessarily any indication of whether it's offline or not to an outsider. You know, somebody could put, you know, solar panels on their home and just kind of have them there, and everybody assumes that they're working when in fact it's down. So unless it's, you know, self-reported or by a realtor or something along those lines, I think it'll be a, maybe it makes sense that, you know, in year 25 of a system's life, where, you know, you could theoretically go and say, hey, is that system still working? You know, at that point in time, if they haven't come back for another compliance permit or something along those lines.
That's a really good point, Michael. Yeah, I'm not completely sure why this particular thing is targeted for removal. I understand with signs. Signs tend to get ratty if people don't maintain them, and they get abandoned and they kind of are a blight after a while when they get ratty looking. I'm not sure solar panels are going to be the same after 24 months of not being used. And we still have some of those satellite dishes that are 6 feet wide around on houses in a couple places. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that people don't necessarily remove that don't look good, or, but this is a functional system, so maybe there's a difference, but how do you know that it's not working unless it's self-reported? It's a great point.
So I guess the only other way is that, you know, I guess it's possible that it's broke, like you have a broken panel, right? That
Yeah.
it's hit with a baseball or hail or something along those lines. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely stopped functioning. As far as that goes, it underperforming likely, and it could very well cease to function after you know, serious damage. But you know, that's still, you know, I guess that would be another situation in which you could approach somebody and say, hey, I noticed that after that hailstorm, or, you know, your kid's baseball practice, that you've got 4 broken panels. That in theory, I guess you could go along those lines.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering why that's even there. What's the intent? Because we don't have anything like that for fences or work sheds or, you know, anything else that may be dilapidated and unsightly. And I mean, well, that gets into a different thing. But I mean, if they're not functioning, it's like, I don't know why we're singling out solar panels to be removed when there's so many other things that might not be working on a property, but we don't require those to be removed.
Well, that's a good point, but there is, besides the zoning ordinance, most of our violations for property maintenance don't come from the zoning ordinance. They either come from the city code or from the International Property Maintenance Code, which the city has adopted. And that deals with all sorts of things. I mean, and technically, you know, that's where we get the authority to send somebody a violation notice if they've got a broken door. They don't have a door on the front of the house in the winter. And I can tell you where there's a house like that. You know, there's siding falls off the house or gets peeled off in a storm. That's where we get the authority to do that, that kind of violation notice. But I totally agree. I'm not completely sure why this is in the code. It sort of makes sense though, from the point of if it's a vacant house and there's broken panels, it certainly doesn't help anything being as a visible part of the home. it's not this isn't an issue we really have to deal with. It's just something that I see in here that seems like an unreasonable burden in the code for us to have to deal with, to start with. I mean, it just, a 12-month removal period is it just doesn't seem right that there's that kind of a strict.
I would say either strike it, or I mean, if it is in there, give it the longest period it can, because I do think it's going to really be a non-issue for enforcement largely, and maybe I'll eat my words on that someday, but maybe it becomes more of an issue at year 25 or when things start failing. However, even if they do fail, unfortunately, it's just not something that's readily visible unless it is an actually unless the panels are broken or shattered for some reason. So I do think that it's not going to be a burden on enforcement, because I don't think it's going to be readily seen, at least in the near term.
Right.
So this applies to not just the roof mounted ones. This is for like ground mounted as well.
Yeah, it says system, so it applies to all of it, and that's where it seems more logical that a ground mounted system might become some kind of an issue.
Right, because I was just thinking, like, if it's not going to damage anybody, who cares if it's up on your seat roof? But I guess I can see a little bit more of an argument for the ground mounted.
Okay, well, I'll maybe massage this a little bit, but I think I'm hearing that kind of generally we're talking about something positive to change some of these requirements to make it less burdensome, if nothing else. We didn't get to talk about parking last time, but I did, when we went through our last amendments as LDC, we made some changes to some of the standards for parking based on square foot of storage area, and it's basically for warehousing. And I decided need to take a closer look at this and find out what studies actually show, rather than just take these numbers and accept that they're good, that they're valid. So we purchased the International Transportation Engineering software for parking demand generation, which gives us several hundred categories of land uses and studies that have been compiled for each of those land uses. And those studies basically show us for something like multiple family dwelling units, 5 units or more, how many studies they have. And it might be 150, it might be 25. And you can aggregate the data and get a report that shows, with a graph of all of these different studies on one graph, that shows for each study how many parking units there were, and then a best line of fit through all of those data points, and then an analysis of how many parking units, how much parking per whatever it is we're talking about, per dwelling unit, per bedroom, for those. And it's really kind of fascinating in a weird way, that what I found was, for a lot of the uses we have for those more commercial type of uses, our code was actually pretty good. It was fairly well on what the study supported. And I was surprised that some of the stuff we have for residential was not as good. What did not fit the data, and particularly for multifamily, it seems like our requirements were overboard for some of those things, and we didn't have some categories in there that I thought we should have. I mean, there's dozens of categories you could have for multifamily units. And if we were in somewhere like Los Angeles, that might make sense, where we have a category where we break it down into 20 unit apartments, from 5 to 20, from 21 to 50, from 50 to 100, from 100 to 200, from 200 to 500. But we realistically, we don't need that many categories at this point. But I thought of, actually, I have a couple here that I'm suggesting to add, which would be the 4 and 5 here. And that number 4 kind of speaks to the housing affordability issue we have several hundred units of affordable housing in the city, subsidized Section 8 housing. And according to the studies, 1 space per dwelling unit is plenty, and it kind of makes sense. People that have less income are not as likely to have extra vehicles, which is kind of the reason we have standards that are higher for single family housing, 2 spaces per dwelling unit. But it doesn't fit with the data. So I'm suggesting that we keep the, actually, so this is not the same one that I was working on more recently, because I was going to suggest we keep this multiple family units with 3 or 4 dwelling units as it is, and then change the next category to 5 or more dwelling units, and reduce the number of spaces to 1 space per dwelling unit in the central business district and mixed use districts, from 1.125 down to 1, so this should actually be a yellow number 1. And it is in the more recent version of this I have. And then adding a category, multifamily units with 20 or more with the subsidized, and subsidized housing units of 1 space per dwelling unit, because that fits with the data we've seen from the ITE. And then for housing exclusively for senior citizens, that's not congregate care, like a assisted living facility, a 1/2 space per dwelling unit, plus 1 space for employee on peak shift. And then actually hotels and motels, this surprised me, but 1 space per dwelling unit for hotels seems to actually produce extra parking. And this is a minimum. So the developer can request up to, or can actually go over the minimum by up to 20% without any justification. So it's actually not quite a minimum. The threshold is that minimum plus 20% is what they can do without a variance. But so these numbers, that's where these numbers are coming from. And we didn't really have anything that necessarily dealt with all types of congregate care facilities like substance abuse facilities. So I just wanted to add something in this number 8 to deal with, things that aren't extended care or assisted living or convalescent or nursing homes. And then just down here, we have these categories for educational, but the truth is we can't regulate the design of public parking lots for the NMU or for our public schools. Those are all regulated through the state.
Should we even have those associated there, or is it just?
Well, it does say public and private in these categories. So, and then commercial or trade schools. So I just wanted to put a little disclaimer in here that most public schools are exempted by state law. That's the only thing I was suggesting to.
Yep, that's fair.
Dave, I've got a general question, and that is that you know, I think this is all making sense for, you know, for new developments, new construction. But do you know of anything that we can do to try and encourage either usage of existing parking or sharing parking, or, you know, working, like, can we encourage people to somehow, you know, do a shared parking schedule with, you know, with a residential development sharing with a commercial development, or, you know, those types of things? Because it seems like, and maybe I've got this wrong, but it seems to me like we've got an enormous amount of surface parking downtown in places where it seems like it is not the best use for the land. And you know, a lot of it seems like it's sitting empty most of the time.
Yeah, good point. So the standards we adopted in the land development code, we adopted standards for general commercial district and for for the downtown. We reduced the parking minimums. We also did a allowance for like the mixed use district that allows parking to be found anywhere within 2,000 feet of the property, in addition to kind of reducing the standards, the overall minimum. And then we set a parking maximum. The 20% over was not part of our code previously. I think we're kind of trying to do everything we can, and this is part of it, what we just talked about, reducing, you know, where we can, the minimum or the required minimums without totally getting rid of minimums, because you know, there are cities that are getting rid of minimums altogether, but it's a little harder for us with the amount of snow we get and the reduction that puts on available spaces because of our parking ban. And
Yeah, we're still pretty car dependent too.
yeah, and you know, so the transit piece is another thing we're working on, and we're going to be probably talking about that a lot more in the next couple of years as we really start working on implementation of a route or two. And but the shared parking lot idea, it's, you know, there is in the 3rd Street corridor section, there is a shared parking option. That historically has not worked out real well. And so trying to, you know, that whole thing of within, if you're within 2,000 feet, and I think it's in the mix. Well, there's 2 different standards on that, and for different districts. But so we have adopted those standards where it doesn't matter what the land use is. If they have parking available and you can park there, all you have to do is, you know, have an agreement that you can show us. If you're trying to get approval for something that requires parking, now, and this is from the section of the code, it says for the low density residential and non-medium density residential districts, here's the requirement. Parking must be located within 2,000 feet of the lot on which the use is located. If the use is located in a building, the distance, okay, it's about measurement. For site plan review for offsite parking in all districts except residential where offsite parking is located on a lot other than a lot occupied by the use which requires it, site plan approval for both is required. In the central business district, let's see, it's only for residential uses. The only requirements for residential, all other principal uses are exempt.
Okay.
special uses except outdoor food and beverage must meet minimum parking requirements unless otherwise modified in the ordinance. And actually, the Third Street Corridor District is basically the same standard. The only parking requirements are for residential and assembly uses like the funeral homes, art gallery, whatever. Like that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we're doing everything we can, so.
Yeah, I could tell you that I wish the shared parking agreement thing was hopefully somebody will come forward and want to do one of those and it works
Yeah.
good for everybody and it sets a good example, because the only ones we really have really been problematic. I mean, they've been lawsuit, issues.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we talked to the guys who are doing that new marijuana shop down on Genesee about that issue. And, it'd be great if, some of the people down there could combine and come up with an agreement like that, where it actually set a good example and work well, because we do need something like that to help us kind of, I think it would be really helpful if we could see those kind of things happening.
Yep.
I don't want to keep you guys too much longer. So it's up to you guys how long you want to go. We didn't talk about signs the last time. I got a couple pretty easy issues here. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read through this, but maybe we could end with this. And then I hope you guys have a chance to look at the rest of the stuff, especially I'll make sure I'll send out this most recent version of this before our next meeting, but I'm not sure we have anything else on our next agenda besides that review of the downtown plan. There's one thing I'm not sure that they made it in the deadline. I don't think so. So I think we're probably just looking at having that presentation next time. This sign issue, though, there's only a couple things here about projecting signs. We had no minimum allowance for a projecting sign. It was only based on this. You can have up to, you can only go as much as 4 feet over a public right of way. But there was no minimum, like we guarantee you can have a sign that's at least 3 feet long. It basically said the sign can project 3 inches for each linear foot of distance to the nearest side lot line. So it takes, the math is here. I've got some of the math down here on how that works. So for a 16-foot distance, you can get to the 4-foot sign. We have a business downtown that is planning to open soon, and they're like 5 feet from the nearest side lot line. So they can have a 1 foot, 3 inch projecting sign. And it's not funny, but they do fortunately have a lot of wall space. So they can put up wall signs on 2 different walls. But this is really an issue. And this is actually brought up to me before that came up by the sign contractor that brought up this next issue as well on the electronic message centers. One of the issues is the 15-foot requirement. And I'm not sure how we missed this, but 15 is an odd number. It doesn't make sense in terms of dimensional construction at all. So one of the issues, and this was a suggestion that was brought up by this contractor based on the number of, and we did a study on this several years ago, and he had it spot on. There's several, close to 10 businesses west of Lincoln Avenue on Washington Street that have non-conforming electronic message center signs that exceed that 15 or 16 feet and are much closer to double that size. Some are more than double that size. So they're all now non-conforming for size, and that makes it difficult for them in terms of reconstruction or maintenance. There are pretty generous maintenance allowances in here for EMCs in our code because they're so expensive on the front end. But it seemed like it could be a reasonable ask to allow those EMCs west of Lincoln Avenue, which is sort of a different, you know, it's a much different district than downtown, which that allows no EMCs, to have those up to 32 square feet, 4 feet by 8 feet or 2 feet by 16. So that's something to consider that as well, that issue.
Okay, is that all you want to cover tonight, Dave?
If I'm here as long as you guys want me to be.
I'm fading fast.
Me too. So Dave, our next meeting, we have the presentation, and then we'll go over this a final time, or are we gonna?
We have, we don't really have a strict limit on, I mean, I really probably should start looking at a calendar and dates for city commission. Ultimately, I think it would be perfect if we could get these things adopted, whatever code amendments adopted before the end of the calendar year. So we need to start looking at the city commission's calendar and probably planning to have a hearing in early December at the latest, their first December meeting. I ultimately like to have as much time as we can before the end of the year to go over these issues, because, you know, we've had 2 meetings now where we've discussed these, and we're only talking about a small set of issues at each meeting. And, you know, we haven't even got agreement on all these things yet. And but, you know, so there's a lot to fine tune here still.
Okay. Okay, well, we can keep plugging away at it, but if everybody wants to quit for tonight, I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah.
Seems like that's the consensus.
Okay.
But thanks, I think we covered a lot of stuff, which is good. All right, do we want to do comments? We ready for that? Commissioner Andres?
I just have one. When we are doing, I noticed when we're in, when we open it up to the public and the public speaks and then we close it to the public, they're still asking questions, and it may help speed things up if we stick to, you know, when we close public comment, that's the end of the discussion for the public. And not that I don't welcome public comment, I just think there's a time and a place, and when the public interjects, it makes things more complicated, I think, than it needs to be. So that's my consensus.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Well, let's just go through. Commissioner Larson, do you have any comment? Commissioner Middlefelt?
Just to put on other people's radars, Joy and I were part of a National Science Foundation funded project on coastal development. And we've been working on, last year we held a bunch of meetings with stakeholders in the county, throughout really the South Shore of Lake Superior communities from all over. But we've been working to put together like a final report, and that should be out in October, right, Joy? Isn't that what we talked about?
I think so. I hope so.
So hopefully we'll get you guys, at least if you're interested, a copy of this nice glossy publication that we've been working on for over the summer. So I'm pretty proud. It's pretty interesting work pulling together research from the Great Lakes region and really trying to look at what does sustainable development look like along our coast, and given what we're seeing with climate change and everything. So it was a fun project, and yeah, if you're interested, we can get you a copy of the final results of that project.
Yes, please.
A great project.
Commissioner Dunn?
No comments, but I would like to see a copy of that. Nice work.
Commissioner Brooks? Oh, we can't hear you. You're good, okay. And no comments for me. Dave, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I just say that I don't have any more information on the Altel suit. That's pretty much it. Thanks. I appreciate everybody hanging in there so late with us, me.
All right, well then I adjourn this meeting and I will see you guys in a couple of weeks.